Let me introduce our speakers. I will start in the order in which they will speak. The first speaker is Eduardo Guerrero Gutierrez. He's a Mexican political analyst and theorist. He currently works for the political consulting firm Lantia, which he co-founded. He has advised the President of Mexico, the Center for National Research and Security, and the Chamber of Deputies. He has also held positions of command in several government bodies, including the Federal Electoral Institute and the Ministry of Social Development. He has helped pass prominent electoral reforms during his time as a public servant and has authored influential research, including the development of an innovative state transparency index. Mr. Guerrero did his master's at the University of Chicago. He was awarded the university's prestigious Joseph Cropsey Prize in recognition for his outstanding master's thesis.
Thank you.
Please.
Okay. Good morning. Thank you for the invitation to the Harris School students. Thank you to my friend Pedro Gerson. I will try to give you a broad landscape of how insecurity and violence have evolved in Mexico during the last years. This is more or less the structure of my talk. I will be trying to take only the 15 minutes I have. I will talk a little about the President Calderon's strategy on security issues, then the phenomena of cartel fragmentation and the dispersion of violence in Mexican territory, then how violence behaves. It's like a biological epidemic. And the recent violence and insecurity trends that we have now in the different regions of Mexico. We have a new phenomenon called vigilantism that is now emerging in several regions of the country that is pretty worrying. And finally, I will give you some ideas I have of how the Mexican government should tackle this problem in Mexico. So basically, what I have to say about the Calderon's strategy is that this previous government in Mexico decided to confront the cartels, especially through a strategy of high-profile captures. Also, while the federal police was revamped, even though the prevailing corruption was not tackled, the judiciary in Mexico remained overall unreliable. Also, America supported Mexico providing intelligence. The American government gives to the Mexican government some money, but it's really a very marginal amount. It's only about 4% on average of our spending on security matters at the federal level. So it's really marginal. It's really a marginal amount. Finally, during the Calderon period, there were no programs, social programs in Mexico implemented in order to prevent massive recruitment by criminal organization of young people in marginal areas of the country. The strategy of Calderon did not tackle three phenomena linked to organized crime-related violence. In the first place, the systematic capture of kingpins begets an agency problem within criminal organizations. Second, the violence fosters extortion and other criminal activities. So it is not true, as the Calderon government argues, that the problems of extortion in Mexico and of territory control by criminal organization was before he took office. In fact, our rates of extortion really increased during his administration, and more or less I have proven that violence precedes and fosters extortion. And finally, we in Mexico, not only the government but also society and the analysts, we really didn't understand the problem we had. The government argued that there was a violence in the country, but that was not a really worrying phenomenon because, according to the government, this was due to the self-destruction of the cartels. They were confronting themselves. So we just have to wait until they will destroy themselves, self-destruct themselves. So it was really a very bad hypothesis. And on the contrary, because the government didn't intervene immediately to stop the violence, the violence expanded and increased during all the years of the administration. Just to show you how the phenomena of cartel fragmentation happened in Mexico, we had in the first year of the Calderon government 6 cartels. Cartels are regional criminal organizations that dedicated to drug trafficking. The colors identifies the cartel. Then we had 8 the next year with the division of the Sinaloa cartel that is in blue. Next year we have 10 more divisions within the Sinaloa cartel and the Tijuana cartel. Also the Golfo cartel divided. Then we have 11 cartels the next year, 16 cartels in 2011. You can see all this fragmentation. Then some of these small cartels disappeared, and we had 11 cartels in 2012, and during the last year, we have 9 cartels. So we have had this problem of fragmentation, and the problem of fragmentation was leading to the dispersion of organized crime-related violence. You can see in this map the municipalities with 12 or more annual organized crime-related deaths. That is 1 on average per month in these municipalities. So we have, with this problem, 52 municipalities during the first year of Calderon's administration, where in these 52 municipalities, 1/4 of the population resides. Next year, we have the problem in 85 municipalities, 132, almost 200. You can see the dispersion of violence due to the fragmentation of the cartels. In many new territories, sometimes the cells that separated from the cartel go and establish in a new territory, and then they do not do drug trafficking anymore, but extortion and kidnapping. They work like mafias, selling protection, selling private protection to some families or business. More than 200 municipalities with this problem in 2011. And then the dispersion decreases a little. And last year we have this problem of executions, 1 at least per month in 172 municipalities. Why is important the execution, this kind of murder? Because if you have this at least 1 per month in your municipality, This means that you really have a problem of confrontations between criminal organizations, and this will really reduce the level of living, of good living you have in your community. Violence and extortions are positively related. You can see this here, and more clearly, you can see this here. This is Veracruz in 2010, and when in 2011 the violence increased in Veracruz, then immediately the extortion rate also increased. This is how an epidemic of violence behaves. You have increase in the executions, a moderate increase. Then if you use a formula, a very basic statistical formula to detect epidemics in biological or sanitary epidemics, then you have this kind of alert or outbreak. And if you don't do nothing, if the government doesn't take action, then the violence will increase to uncontrollable levels, to really, really high levels. So the chance you have to stop or reduce violence then in the short term will be drastically reduced. It will not be possible to stop violence in several months, possibly in several years, as in this case. This is the case of Ciudad Juárez. You can see that once the epidemic begins, then you will have these high levels of violence, and then this reduction of violence we see here is due in a big proportion to a high spending of the federal government in this area. More than 6 billion pesos invested in this municipality during 2010 and 2011. That was the way the federal government tried to solve the problem, with massive federal investment in social programs. Here you have the epidemic of violence in Culiacan, that is the capital of the state of Sinaloa. This is the city of Chihuahua. Tijuana, that is, I think, the only case we have in Mexico of an epidemic of violence that has been controlled in some way. This is Acapulco. So, as you can see in this summary table, really, when you have an epidemic, a violence epidemic, it will take several years to take control over it. You have the epidemic of Ciudad Juárez with a total of 73 months since the outbreak. And it's just exceptional, the number of months where you have, once the epidemic began, it's really exceptional when the violence in 1 month is below the previous average. Here you have a comparison between the last year of the Calderon administration and the first years of Peña Nieto administrations in terms of violence. We have a reduction of 18% in the violence related to organized crime, these kind of murders, executions. And I have an index, the company where I work in Mexico, we have an index to measure insecurity and violence with these components, high impact crimes, organized crime-related violence, and public perception. And we have, in the last quarter of last year, these results. We have that the most negative scores are in the urban areas, the metropolitan areas of Morelos. Sorry, this is not metropolitan area. This is the state of Morelos, Guerrero, Michoacán, Estado de México, and Distrito Federal are in really bad shape. with a very bad trend in Michoacán with a rapid deterioration of security. Then we have in these states the most positive scores, Zacatecas, Nayarit, Nuevo León, that has had a rapid improvement because of the building of a state police, a very effective state police during the last 3 years, Yucatan and San Luis Potosí. And then we have the whole 32 states of Mexico. You can find them in these quadrants. We have on one side the insecurity level, and on the other axis, the trend, if it's improving or deteriorating. And as you can see in the second quadrant, where we have critical insecurity levels and deterioration, we have states like Morelos, Estado de México, Distrito Federal, Michoacán, Tamaulipas, and Baja California. These are in the worst situation. And we have good news of improvement and low insecurity levels in states like Durango, Nuevo León, Zacatecas, Colimas, and Nayarit. I don't have much time, so I will not comment on some slides. One thing I want to tell you is that violence in Mexico is moving from the north to the center and the south of the country. We have a reduction, a swift decrease of violence levels in states along the US border, but this trend is much more weaker in the rest of the country, as you can see in this graph. Violence decreased swiftly throughout metropolitan areas. You can see this here. See, for example, how Monterrey, the proportion of violence we have in Monterrey in the first quarter of 2012, and see now that is really narrow, the proportion. But if we see how violence has behaved in non-metropolitan areas, the story is different. We have that this reduction is much weaker. So in many ways, the criminal organizations are moving to the rural areas, and they are doing their intensive kidnapping and extortion, killing people, and that's why, in many ways, self-defense groups, vigilante groups have emerged in these rural areas, like in Michoacán and Guerrero. We have this new phenomenon of vigilantism in several states of Mexico, including Baja California, Jalisco, State of Mexico, Morelos, Nayarit, Nuevo León, Oaxaca, Puebla, San Luis Potosí, Tabasco, Tamaulipas, Tlaxcala, Veracruz, and Yucatan. Nationally, self-defense groups have been reported in more than 100 municipalities. At least in 94 of those municipalities, the self-defense groups carries weapons. And additionally, 103 municipalities report rumors or attempts regarding the creation of self-defense groups. So how to confront the problem? One complaint of many analysts to the Mexican government is that they don't have any strategy. And I think that's true. They are only reacting to the problems, to each of the problems, and we don't see a strategy in which the agencies of the government proactively take action over the problem. So this is an idea I have that will make more easier how to confront the problems and where and when. And I have these two variables. One is institutional development of the security sector at the local level, and organized crime social base. This last variable assesses the availability of criminal networks and individuals, which may be potentially recruited by criminal organizations. A low level suggests that criminal organizations must rely on outsider gunmen. So if we measure these two variables in the states where we have more violence in Mexico, we can know where the government, the federal government, can take action first, where you can have results immediately on the short term. And this will be the case in Monterrey, where in fact now there is a big improvement. In the case of Guadalajara, the case of Tijuana, Saltillo, and Toluca, in these cities we have a high institutional development of the security sector, of the police, and we have a low base of the criminal networks. So it's the idea, these are the ideal places where you can take action in a first period. These are the quadrants. So you have, as I told you, this high institutional development in these cities combined with a low organized crime social base. And in the worst scenario, where you have high organized crime social base and a low institutional development, we have in this case Morelia, Acapulco, Juarez, La Laguna. In these places, it will be really tough to make progress in the short term because of these conditions. So what I recommend is first to concentrate in the places where you can have progress in the short term and to have credibility and the public opinion, and later to move to the other quadrants so you can have a kind of legitimacy in your planning, your strategy. These are my conclusions. While there is an overall positive trend in violence levels, there are important caveats to be taken into account. First, violence crises in Monterrey and Juarez were overcome through a combination of effective lobbying by local interest groups and lavish spending from the federal government, which may be hard to come by in other places. Second, mafias and violence are nesting outside large towns, where especially where institutions are weaker and social capital is low. While third, vigilantism has risen as an attractive alternative for groups that seek to oppose local mafias. This is a really worrying trend. And finally, authorities that attempt to challenge nested local mafias will face unprecedented political pressure. Thank you.
Thank you, Eduardo, for a very interesting presentation. Let me introduce our second speaker, Alberto Vollmer. He's a chairman and CEO of Rum Santa Teresa, Venezuela's leading premium rum manufacturer. He entered the company as a third shift production supervisor in 1996, was later assigned to the export department, and since 1999, due to a financial crisis, led the company turnaround as its new CEO. Since then, the company has grown both in business and in social development initiatives. After 2000, in a politically volatile Venezuela, he faced other external challenges like land invasions, land seizures, and community leadership. In 2003, after gang members assaulted the company, he founded Project Alcatraz, a reinsertion program for criminals. Since, he has continued causing change in the local community, has done consulting on reinsertion of violent individuals both in Colombia and in El Salvador. Mr. Vollmer participated in the Venezuelan Police Reform Commission. He is a fellow Young Global Leader, a member of YPO, and sits on several boards, namely the Venezuelan American Chamber of Commerce, CONAPRI, Domegas, and Fundación Bigot, among others. Prior to his entry to ROM Santa Teresa, Alberto practiced as a civil engineer dedicated to alternative construction in the slums of Caracas and as a photographer. He studied engineering at the Metropolitan University of Caracas and pursued other studies in France and in the United States. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning? Okay, thank you. I have the same problem Andres has. I have to move around to be able to present. Well, today I'm going to present Project Alcatraz. It's a reinsertion program of criminals in Venezuela. But before that, I need to give you a little bit of context about Venezuela and about how all of this occurred, because if not, it's difficult to explain. So I'm the CEO of RON Santa Teresa. It's over a 200-year-old company. It was founded in 1796, still surviving in Venezuela. And basically I entered the company because of a certain situation. I used to be an engineer, but I'm all right now. And on the family's request, I entered the business. I entered, let's say, in the lower ranks. And after about 3 years, due to sort of misled leadership or a misled organization, the company little by little started going into a financial crisis. In 1999, we had lost 2/3 of capital. We went into Chapter 11. And I was asked to lead the turnaround of the business. I don't know if any of you have been in a turnaround, but turnarounds are complicated. Anyway, especially in Venezuela, just to give you an idea, I became the CEO in February of 1999. And just to give you a little bit of context, Chavez had been elected in December of 98, and he was taking power in February of 1999. So it was very good timing for me, at least. Anyway, this whole process of restructuring started. It was a very difficult restructuring process. We had to restructure debt, we had to restructure operations, we had to restructure basically the whole layout of the company. It took us about maybe less than a year. And the day we signed, or let's say the week after we signed the financial agreement with the banks, this article came out, which says, like Ave Phoenix, RON Santa Teresa is reborn from its ashes, right? Now, for people who have been in a turnaround is like before and after, right? And it's like the toughest thing you've ever been through. You feel like after that, everything is going to be simple. Now, what I didn't know was how difficult it was going to be to survive in Venezuela with Chavez at the head, right? So anyway, just if you see the date, this says January 2000. In December 1999, Chavez had just changed the constitution, right? So the rules were totally different. And he was beginning to, let's say, foster a whole bunch of activities. For instance, land invasions. And 1 month after this article came out, when we thought things were going to be easy, I was called up around 2 in the morning by the head of security. And he said, listen, we've got about 500 families that are squatting on our land, and we can't even send security there. What do we do? Well, in a situation like this, when you've got the president backing this kind of activity, and when you have, in this case, we had the head of the invasion was Jose Rodriguez. He had participated in the coup of '92 with Chavez. So he had good friends, very powerful friends. And so in a situation like that, basically you more or less have 2 automatic options. The first option is, well, there's an expression I won't use, but you can't do anything about it, right? So you just cross your arms and go back home and say, well, we lost that, right? That's one. The other is, okay, we're going to take the law in our own hands and we're going to shoot these people out. Those are the 2 options, and generally the violent one is always the one that expresses your weakness, right? Well, after we confronted these guys, still not with violence or anything like that, basically the conversation with the head of the invaders was, listen, I'm not moving out of here. I'm backed by the government. Forget it. You lost this. So I remember I told him, well, okay, you invade our land, I'll invade your mind. He said, whatever that means. Well, I'll tell you a little bit about that in a second. But anyway, this negotiation started at that moment, and it lasted about 6 to 8 months. Finally, we reached an agreement where we, the company, would give the land and the urban project. The invaders, or let's say, sorry, the governor, which is this guy on the left, would give the infrastructure. CONAVI, which is the housing institution of the government, would finance the building, and the invaders would build the homes. So little by little, that agreement started to develop into the housing project. Of course, remember, we had only signed the agreement of restructuring the company. We had to build the company back together again at the same time, right? So anyway, these are the workers, sorry, the invaders working. And little by little, that invasion turned into Camino Real. Now, Camino Real is, for us, and the reason I begin with this for context, is because it taught us an incredibly valuable lesson to us as a business in Venezuela, in the Venezuela with Chavez. But this goes for, I mean, please listen to this for those who live in Latin America, or who want to live in Latin America in the future. This is something to keep in mind. First thing, what happened with the head of the invasion, the head of the invaders, Jose Rodriguez? You know, these things, you know, when you start working with your counterpart, with your adversary, then the human side starts coming out, and you start getting more related to the human side. Well, maybe 6 months after we had resolved this problem, someone from, sorry, I'm going to name another school, which is Harvard, from Harvard Law School, called up and said, listen, I've got two places for a negotiation course. Well, I sent the head of human resources and the head of the invaders, also a human resources guy. And so anyway, they did this course. After maybe a year after that, one day he called me up and he said, listen, I want you to be the godfather of my son. And so then I became the godfather of his son. We're compadres now. By the way, my godchild is called Hugo Rafael, like Chavez. Huh? And so that's the first thing. That's the first lesson, because not only that, but 8 years later, we started looking for someone with his profile. And actually now he works in the foundation. So that's the first lesson with people. The second lesson has to do with this thin red line, right? And we're talking about poverty. Andres is talking about the urbanization effect, people with land, people who don't have the big gap between the rich and the poor. And this is actually the reality we live in Latin America, right? Us and them. And us, a lot of us are here, and them are across that red line. Now what happens is whoever crosses that red line first wins, right? And the last 15 years of Venezuela have been about that red line. Now, in our case, what we realized was if you're not invading, they're invading you. So how do you invade? Plus, how do you change the game? And the first lesson was the map isn't the territory. When I say the map isn't the territory, our mental map was inside the business boundaries. And that is our duty, that is what we have to do. But after that invasion, we said, we have to get outside of our boundaries. We have to start invading that territory. First thing. Second, you can only win if we both win, right? There's no zero-sum game here. It's about making the pie bigger. And the third, it's about invading. And it's invading with minds, with concepts and values, right? So that has turned into a mantra. And there's a fourth one that I haven't put here, which is being unconditionally constructive. Always, no matter who is on the other side, right? So that, little by little, we started saying, okay, how do we start invading these new territories, right? This is, just to give you an idea, this is where the distillery is. This is called El Eje Este, the eastern axis of the Estado Aragua, of the Aragua state, which is one of the most dangerous territories in Venezuela, because this is sort of like a drop-off zone from Caracas and from another place which is called Valles del Tuy. This is where these criminals come and hide. So, of course, this has become, in the last 20 years, a very dangerous place. Now, what are the correct characteristics? This, by the way, all these homes here were a product of invasions from the 60s. The first the first Chavista round. Chavez was the second Chavista round. And what you have here, we have around 65% unemployment. We've got about over half the population not in schools of the kids. We've got 85% of unwed mothers. That is one of the basics of the big problem we have. And part of what you read, the homicide rate in 2003 was 114 homicides per 100,000 inhabitants. So just to give you a little bit of an idea of what that means, Honduras, which is a very, very dangerous place in the world, has around close to 60 homicides per 100,000. Revenga, at this time, was 114 homicides per 100,000. That was, killings every single day, every single week. So, of course, this was one of the ideas. We said, we could more or less intuit that security was one of the issues we had to enter. We also were thinking of education, schools, but we didn't really know how to go into this because the other thing was that the police was so absolutely corrupt. How do you get into this? So anyway, we started giving talks in the slums, and really talks don't do anything. Against bullets, they don't really do anything, and against a lot of money, they don't do very much. And now the important thing here is that when you start focusing on something, things start happening, and suddenly things fall. You have to be very careful what you wish for because those things tend to happen. Well, we weren't able to enter these issues, but we became, whoa, I've got to hurry. We became victims of this situation. And this is where Proyecto Alcatraz starts. The company was assaulted by 3 members of a gang. They took a guard, they almost killed him, almost finished him off at the end, took his gun and his radio. And of course what we were seeing was if we don't do anything about it, this is going to be going downhill. And it's basically the same situation I told you about before. One is getting bullied, right? You're gonna have to leave that place if you don't do anything about it. And the second is if you apply force or violence, violence only breeds violence, as Mr. Guerrero was just saying, and that will escalate. So once again, like in the case of Camino Real, we were thinking, okay, what if we try to understand this situation better? So actually, what happened at that moment, I asked the head of security, since the police isn't gonna go and get them, you go and get them, right? Start hunting them down. He used to be an ex-policeman. Anyway, he after about 3-4 days, he called up and he said, I got one of the guys. What do you want me to do with him? I said, well, just hand him over to the police. Now he knows we can catch up. So he hands him over to the police. I won't go into the details because I don't have very much time, but the police decides to go and execute the guy. Luckily, the head of security goes with the guy, and after negotiating, he realizes the police is going to kill him, so he calls up, and at the end of the day, we had to, I told him, listen, bribe the police so they don't kill the guy. So afterwards he says, okay, now I've got the guy in my hands, what do I do? And I said, well, bring him here. Let's have a gentleman's conversation. So anyway, he brings this guy over, and we have a conversation, and it ends up in 2 options. The first option was to work with no pay for 3 months to make up for what he had done. We would give him food and lodging, but he had to obey a whole bunch of rules. The other was the legal option, which was hand him over to the police. Of course, he agreed to the first option. He had already been to the police. And anyway, we start working with him. A few days later, we catch the second guy, who happened to be the head of the gang. We offered the 2 options also. And after, of course, he agreed to work also. He started working, and after a few days, he asked if we could have a conversation. And in that conversation, he asked, listen, I'm seeing this could be an opportunity. Do you think 2 or 3 of my friends could maybe join and enter this, the same agreement? I said, well, what I was thinking was, bingo, we're gonna catch the 3rd one, right? One of these guys is the 3rd one. Well, I said, yeah, sure, tell him to come on Friday and we'll meet in such and such a place. And sure enough, next Friday, 2 or 3 guys turned up, but the whole gang turned up. There are 22. And this was sort of like, I think we made a mistake. We put our foot in it, right? And well, anyway, in these things you can't go backwards. You know, they say in Spanish, chivo que se devuelve se desnuca, no? You know. Well, if you don't speak Spanish, someone will translate. And so anyway, we had to keep on going forward. So anyway, we take them on. We start working with this gang, and after 2 months, we realized we had become part of the enemy of their enemy gang. These guys had been killing each other for about 10 years. And it more or less, I won't go into the details again, but it more or less boiled down to, we're gonna have to recruit that gang also, right? So anyway, we went ahead and recruited the gang. This was the day of the graduation of the gang. There was a bigger gang, 36 guys, most of them homicide cases. And actually, we worked with them separately for about 2 months until finally one day we said, you know what? We had a rugby tournament, right? We used rugby as a tool. And at this tournament, there are about 3,000 spectators that come every year. It's an international tournament. He said, can you imagine if Alcatraz is playing and suddenly the other gang comes in and kills 3 of the guys? It's really gonna be a bad tournament. So we decided to put them in a room and make them make peace. Anyway, these guys, after this session, they made peace. And what was amazing was that in less than a week's time, we had 6 other gangs queuing up to enter the program. And this was really surprising. It was like, whoa, what did we touch here? What fiber did we touch? Anyway, since then, we've been recruiting all the gangs. And you know, it's been gang after gang, it's been surprise after surprise. We've learned, the first 7 lessons we learned. First of all, the male role model in the family, you know, one always tends to see all the economic things, all the economic reasons why this happens. It all boils down to the male role model. That is the #1 problem here. Because what they look for when they enter gangs is the male role model, right? And we won't go into all the economic impact of not having the male role model in the house. Second, the gang is the substitute family. They substitute their family for the gang, or the other way around, the gang for their family. The other thing we realized was that until then, they're only thinking about survival. They're thinking about the next 2 or 3 days. They're not thinking about their future. So one of the things we've done is make them think about the future. The other thing is their identity doesn't come with the identity card, ID card. It comes with their bank card, their what's it called, the debit card? That's when their identity begins. And then we realized one of the things, it was a huge discovery, we didn't know it was called restorative justice, but making the victimizers confront their victims, even homicide cases, it's incredibly powerful. The other lesson was the 199 rule, which is you never, in any community, no matter how big or how small, and the smaller, the higher the number is, you never reach 1% of the population that is criminal. Maybe it's 0.25%, the hard criminals, maybe 0.5%, you know, the rest, the hangers-on. So how do you activate the other 99% of the population? How do you activate the social basis, right? In the favor of security. And the other thing was, these guys are leaders. And that is the thing, we always tend to throw them to the rubbish, throw them, how do you call that? To the rubbish, right? You know, human, basura humana, how do you say that? What's that? Human garbage, exactly. One sees these guys as human garbage. These guys are leaders. The thing is, turn that leadership into positive leadership, right? So I won't tell you about the program, but they might come in the answers. And suddenly we started receiving this incredible feedback from the press, because it was a different way of looking at the problem. The big challenge for us was to not only document, but also systematize and be able to scale it. Now we're being able to scale it. Also, we're doing it in the same region. And basically what we want is to be able to export the project to the region. Of course, it's got all this. And there are two very other, there are other steps that have been here. One of the main tools we use is rugby. Rugby is an amazing sport, a tool that we use, where basically we teach 5 values: discipline, respect, how do you say that? Teamwork, fair play, and humility. humildad. Because it's, and the other thing is, how do you get the social basis to work, that 99% to work? And basically, we've been working with another project that's called Casas Blancas. And the idea is to turn these slums into an attractive, beautiful place. Basically, the slums are exactly the same as Positano, Amalfi, all of that, Santorini. The thing is, make them beautiful, right? So we've been doing that, and the impact is really amazing. So finally, to conclude, and I've got a very short video at the end, 1 minute video. The homicide rate has declined. Now, in this eastern axis of Aragua, there are 4 counties. All the counties in 2003 were between 80 and 100 homicides per 100,000 inhabitants. The only county that has declined has been Revenga. The other 3 neighboring counties are still around 80 and 100 homicides per 100,000. 2013, this was numbers of the police. They actually gave us a recognition. We closed the homicide rate at 12 homicides per 100,000 inhabitants. That means in these 10 years, there have been around 700 people that haven't been killed due to this. So now I just want to end. Let's see if this works. 1 second. No.
The Hacienda Santa Teresa is Venezuela's oldest rum distillery, but despite its tranquil setting, it's not immune to the violence that plagues socially divided Venezuela.
Problemas, muertos.
Robando, jodiendo.
No estudia,
matándose con los otros compañeros.
When 2 local gang members attacked a guard and stole his gun, the Hacienda staff tracked them down. The owner gave them a choice: be handed over to the notorious local police force or work at the distillery without pay.
Nosotros pensábamos que querían traer para acá para matarnos.
Como hay amigos nosotros que se han muerto, uno reflexiona y piensa que eso no es la vida que uno merece.
In a country where social divisions and crime levels are both extremely high, this has been an unpredictable success.
Cuando comenzó el proyecto, se corría una ola de que la empresa reclutaba jóvenes con problemas de conducta. Vimos que era un proyecto de vida.
La idea es lograr de que los muchachos puedan desarrollar y ser hombres de bien.
Que está 4 meses en la montaña y ahí donde va a demostrar su conducta, pues.
Si ellos confiaban en nosotros, sabíamos que no había que fallarles, pues.
Después que me metí al Alcatraz, mi mamá se siente bien porque estoy trabajando.
Se me ha quitado un poco la meta delictiva.
Le dan oportunidad de estudiar, le dan un trabajo, ninguna otra persona había hecho eso por ese muchacho.
Una vida nueva.
Hicimos la paz y ahora somos compañeros en equipo. Mi corazón lo que quiere es que todo el mundo se sienta bien, que todos seamos felices.
En lo que tú ves los muchachos con una forma de vida totalmente diferente, tú dices, vale la pena.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. Let me introduce our third speaker, Antonio Arámbula. Antonio Arámbula's activity in the security field starts in 1985 as president of Consejo Nacional de Seguridad Privada, SC, and president of the International Association of Law Enforcement Intelligence Analysts in Mexico. As a security professional, he holds the ASIS International Certification, CPP, and DSE, corresponding to the European legislation. He's also senior professor of the courses Critical Infrastructure Security and Mexican Security Legislation, offered by the Spanish universities Alcalá de Henares and Pontificia de Comillas in Mexico. Arámbula also served as Security and Civil Protection Coordinator for the Instituto Federal Electoral from 2004 to early 2013. And at present, he is Director General of Private Security at Comisión Nacional de Seguridad.
Buenos días. Cuando recibí la invitación a acudir a este evento y a esta prestigiada casa de estudios, tuve una disyuntiva que enfrentar. ¿Cómo acudir ante ustedes? ¿Como el mexicano rebelde y agraviado por la inseguridad? ¿O como el profesional de seguridad certificado o como funcionario público? Decidimos venir los tres.
Hi, I'll be translating for Mr. Antonio. So, all right, when I received the invitation to come here, I faced a big issue, a problem with myself. How to come here before you? Was I gonna come here before you as a Mexican who's like suffering from like all of this violence that's like, that's a problem in my country? Am I gonna come here as a public servant and the professional who is helping to fix these issues in my country? Or, so I chose here to come here as all of these people.
Okay. El segundo tema es felicitarles por la manera de abordar el problema. No podemos contra la inseguridad si no lo vemos desde un contexto integral, como el desarrollo humano, social, preventivo, erradicación de la pobreza y los otros temas que se están debatiendo en estas mesas.
So he wants to think there's a big issue of how to confront these problems that we have. Do we confront violence head on, or do we confront the structural issues that cause violence? Do we confront poverty? Do we confront social issues and things of that sort?
Por eso, mientras les cuento algunos temas o platico de algunos temas que me interesa, van a estar viendo en pantalla algunas imágenes del México real de hoy.
So as I speak of these topics I'm going to present to you, you're going to start seeing some images which represent the true reality of Mexico today.
Policías contra policías.
Policemen against policemen.
Armamento moderno.
Modern weaponry.
¿Qué pasa en un país como este si les matan un soldado?
What happens in a country like this when a soldier is killed?
En México mueren muchos soldados diariamente.
In Mexico, hundreds of servicemen die.
Y policías.
And policemen.
No significa que en este momento su amigo, Juan Antonio Arámbula, como funcionario público, esté criticando a su país.
This doesn't mean that your speaker, Antonio, is criticizing his country.
Lo que estoy tratando de desentrañar es el origen, la verdadera explicación de la violencia para entonces enfrentarla.
What I'm trying to unravel is the real basis for this violence and the explanation to why it's happening in order to be able to confront it.
Sí, lo que ven en este momento es excremento contra policías.
This is human feces being used against policemen.
En todas las láminas encontrarán un factor común, que es impunidad o corrupción.
In all these images, you'll see some common factors, impunity and corruption among them.
Después de muchos años de estudiar el tema de la seguridad, he concluido con firmeza, con convicción, que la seguridad y la inseguridad están en una misma moneda. El otro lado de la moneda de la seguridad es la impunidad y la corrupción.
After having studied corruption, security issues for a long time, I've concluded that security and insecurity are really two sides of the same coin, and this coin, the two sides of the same coin are affected by things like impunity and corruption.
Dicho de otro modo, en todo problema de seguridad encontrarán siempre impunidad y o corrupción.
In all problems of corruption, you'll always find impunity and corruption.
¿Alguien no entiende lo que dice aquí? ¿Lo podrías traducir?
So yeah, the poster says the operative group disease wants you, soldier or ex-soldier, we give you a good salary, food, attention to your family, so that you don't suffer from mistreating, hunger. We will not give you ramen. So, wait, what does it say?
Relax.
¿Qué?
Relax.
Okay, relax. Do not call, I don't see what it says.
No digas el número.
Okay.
Don't tell the number.
So get in touch with this number.
Cada que sucede algo así y quede sin castigo, estamos invitando a que se repita.
Every time something like this happens and it's not punished, we're inviting people to repeat it.
Dicho de otro modo, la única herramienta para luchar contra la impunidad y la corrupción es la ley.
So the only tool to fight against impunity and corruption is the law.
La ley es la parte fundamental de las políticas públicas.
The law is a fundamental aspect of public policy.
De modo que en la escuela de política pública es donde surgen los ciudadanos que van a poder luchar contra la impunidad y la corrupción.
So in the schools of public policy is where we're forming future leaders that are going to be able to fight against corruption and impunity.
Cuando les digo a ustedes que son nuestra única esperanza, no estoy dramatizando.
I'm not exaggerating when I tell you students that you're our only weapon against this problem.
Yo acepté mi trabajo como servidor público del gobierno federal pensando en luchar contra la corrupción y la impunidad.
I accepted my job as a public servant with the government, wanting to fight against corruption and impunity. So this poster says, nothing is used, everything is stolen. Yeah.
You can see. Por eso la estrategia actual del gobierno mexicano tiene una línea rectora que es México en paz.
So the central strategy of the Mexican government now has this big motto, which is Mexico in peace.
No podemos obtener la paz si seguimos sin castigar los delitos.
And we cannot obtain peace unless we punish crimes.
No podemos conseguir la paz con funcionarios corruptos.
And we cannot achieve peace with corrupt public servants.
Porque si no, México seguirá siendo un terreno de guerra.
Otherwise, Mexico will remain a territory of war.
Las instrucciones de nuestro presidente de la República y nuestro secretario de Gobernación son luchar por la paz.
So the plan, the instructions of our president and our government is to fight for peace.
Pero las nuevas políticas públicas deben privilegiar ahora el uso de la inteligencia.
But a new public policy has to give priority to employing intelligence.
Hace aproximadamente 4 años, capturar a un jefe de un cartel en Reynosa, Tamaulipas, le tomó a la Marina más de 8 horas de tiroteo intenso.
So a few years ago, in trying to capture one of the main kingpins, the public force took like almost 8 hours of intense gunfighting in order to be able to achieve this goal.
La más reciente captura del hombre más buscado del planeta tomó el operativo 5 minutos.
Recently, the biggest capture in the history of probably all of the drug war only took 5 minutes.
No significa que todos los casos van a ser así, pero sí es un ejemplo de cómo funciona más la inteligencia preventiva que la violencia, aún la violencia legítima.
Which doesn't mean that all cases of such captures are going to happen in this manner from now on, but it does show a great progress, and it's testament to how much intelligence can work towards improving.
Y el papel del gobierno actual es incorporar a toda la sociedad, incluyendo a la seguridad privada, a las labores preventivas y de inteligencia.
So the role of the government and intelligence is to be able to develop preventive policies as opposed to more like direct confrontational crime policies.
Bueno, pues el trabajo ya inició. En México la seguridad privada organizada supera en 3 veces a las fuerzas de seguridad pública.
So the plan is to get private security to also contribute to this process, and this process has already started. Private security already outnumbers public security by a margin of like 3 to 1.
Para desalentar los temas de autodefensas, estamos trabajando ya en convenios con la seguridad privada, incorporando 3,000 unidades de patrullaje y 200,000 elementos de seguridad o guardias registrados a las labores de prevención.
In order to prevent the creation of illegal private defense groups, we've been working with private security forces in order to make sure security coverage is general and thus prevent this issue.
En pantalla tienes a un sacerdote con chaleco antibalas.
Yeah, this is a priest who has a bulletproof vest.
Me resta, a reserva de sus preguntas y cuestionamientos, porque es un tema muy extenso, es invitarlos a la rebeldía. Aún como funcionario público tengo instrucciones de ser incómodo, de decir la verdad, de no engañar a nuestra población para poderla llamar a coadyuvar con nosotros.
So I invite you, all of you and all of society, to take a vow of rebelliousness. My job as a public servant includes trying to show you the truth and the reality so that you know how things are and can act against them.
Jesse Sabanana. Creo que la lucha es contra la desesperanza y contra el escepticismo.
So the real fight is against hopelessness and skepticism.
Les voy a dejar después. No traduzcas lo que sigue, solo comenta que alguien lo hará después, pero es un fragmento de un poema mexicano que quiero compartir con todos.
So I won't translate this next part. It's a fragment from a Mexican poem.
Dice: México, creo en ti como en el vértice de un juramento. Tú hueles a tragedia, tierra mía, y sin embargo ríes demasiado. ¿Acaso es porque sabes que la risa es la expresión de un dolor callado? Muchas gracias.
All right, so we have many questions. I'll try to summarize them and reformulate them and to try to ask as many as possible. The first thing I want to say is I neglected to introduce Carlos Guzman, the translator. He's a second-year student here at the University of Chicago. So I forgot to introduce him before, but he did a great job. Okay, so let's begin with, what is that noise? Okay. All right, can everybody hear? Yeah, is this? All right, excellent. So let's begin. So the first questions are about security in Mexico. So the first question is, this is summarizing the several of the questions for Eduardo Guerrero and also for Antonio Arámbula. So Eduardo, you spoke about the social basis and the institutions, but you did not make emphasis in your talk on high-level politicians. What can be done when high-level politicians are actually supporting and encouraging this kind of violence and criminal activities, as we know happens in many parts of Mexico? And the question has two parts. So first of all, what can what can those parts of the government that actually want to deal with this, with the other parts of the government that are supporting criminal activities, what can they do? And the second part of the question is, what can citizens do when they want to do something about the problem and they know that high-level politicians, governors, and maybe even at higher levels are supporting criminal activities? So why don't we begin with Eduardo, and then we give an opportunity to Antonio as well to answer this question.
Okay. Well, when I said that one important variable to confront, to analyze, and to design a good strategy to deal with the problem is the social basis of organized crime, I think in this variable it's included, of course, the link of politicians to criminal groups. If you have a community that is completely infiltrated by crime, then you will have all these, the mayor and all these high-level politicians completely controlled and by crime. So I think in some way it is included. And what I was recommending is that you should, to have credibility in your fight, in your strategy, you should begin to work in communities where this link, where this basis is lower, is weaker, so you can be more effective, and later, in a following period, you can fight in the most complicated areas where social crime, where crime is very closely linked to the social base. No? What does citizens can do? Well, in Mexico, the good stories about success in fighting crime have been in places where citizens denounce criminals. And the two paradigmatic cases are Tijuana and Monterrey. In both places, there has been a very nice work with the local police, so people can believe in them, they are credible, and people have the confidence to denounce the criminals and the places where they have the drugs, the weapons, etc.
Thank you. Quisiera hacer la pregunta, reformularla un poquito y agregar otras de las preguntas que le hicieron directamente a Antonio Arámbula. Would you like to translate it?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so let me finish and then. Okay, so la pregunta es así. ¿Qué está, tiene dos partes. ¿Qué está haciendo el gobierno para lidiar con gobernadores corruptos que están solapando el crimen? ¿Por qué existe la impresión que el gobierno federal no está logrando ese objetivo? La segunda es, ¿qué se puede hacer para disminuir las formas de violencia que más afectan al ciudadano común y corriente, como el secuestro y la venta de protección?
So we're reformulating one of the questions made and adding some of the other questions made directly to Antonio Arámbula. So the main question is, what's the government doing, the Mexican government doing, to fight against corrupt officials? And also, what can the government do and what can be done to fight against the most common forms of criminality that affect the people, which include kidnapping and others?
Bien, el tema tiene dos aristas. El primero es territorial. Como han expuesto mis compañeros de panel, se ha logrado recuperar territorios. Eso puedes decirlo.
So the problem is being confronted in two ways, in two main ways. The first one is territorially. So the government has wanted to, and has been successful in retaking territory that was previously occupied by criminal organizations.
Sí. La segunda parte se responde así. Restaurar el Estado de Derecho en un país no es un tema fácil. México ha llegado a registrar tasas de impunidad del 99%. Esto significa que de cada 100 criminales se logra tener indicios de la actuación de 70 de ellos, de los cuales son investigados y procesados 30, de los cuales logran llegar ante un juez 10, de los cuales inician un verdadero juicio 5, de los cuales reciben sentencia 2 y de los cuales la cumplen completa menos de 1. O sea que la probabilidad de éxito de un delincuente en México ha llegado a ser mayor a 99%. El margen de impunidad es demasiado alto. ¿Podrías esa parte?
So regarding the second question, it's a huge, criminality is a huge issue, and it's very hard to restore just like the force of the law in a country like this, where, for example, the rates of impunity can go as high as 99%, where like if of all of the criminals that do a crime or whatever, only 70%, let's say 70% go to court. Of those 70, only 30% actually get charges against them, and so on. The rates are ever decreasing, which results in only about 1% of the criminals who commit a crime actually get punished. So if the rates of impunity are so high, the issue is clearly structurally, I don't know, it's awful. I don't know.
It's okay. Pero con la cultura de la denuncia, con los avances tecnológicos y con la participación del sector social, especialmente el de la seguridad privada, se recolectan evidencias de mejor manera, incluyendo contra servidores públicos de alto nivel. En la pasada semana se inició ya el proceso contra un secretario de gobierno que estaba en funciones y que tuvo que ser removido para ser sujeto a juicio. El secretario de gobierno del estado de Michoacán. La instrucción a nosotros es abatir la impunidad. Eso va a ser difícil, pero ya comenzamos.
So this problem can be confronted through policies that develop a culture of denunciation, social denunciation, where people actually see these crimes and like go and inform the public force about what's happening, and also the involvement of private security forces to help and support the whole process. So this ways of confronting the problem serve to attack all impunity and criminality at all sectors of society, including high-ranking public officials. For example, last week, a high-ranking secretary had charges furthered against him because of corruption.
Okay, now we have some questions for Alberto Vollmer. So, one question that we received in several forums is, you seem to have found a very effective set of actions. Why doesn't the government do this? I mean, it's difficult to say exactly how the government could do this, but that's one of the questions. Another side of the same question, let me ask it at the same time because it's related, is how scalable this, the kind of policies that your company is following and that seem to involve you personally as well, how scalable is this if you wanted to make this a large-scale effort? And finally, could one say that the source of these policies and these invasions really was, at the root was the attacks and the invasions? Without the invasions and the attacks, there would have been no reaction, there would have been no policies. If you can comment on that.
Thank you. Three very good questions. Well, yeah, I'd say the actions have been effective, and I think it's mainly based on information and personal relationships, right? Because once you get the personal relationships, not only that, the other thing is that information. Everybody here knows Seneca, right? He used to say, information and silence are the sources of power. Everybody, at least I used to think those two words used to go together. But then I realized, look at this. Suddenly everybody looked up, what the hell's happening, right? Well, silence is a source of power. Information is a source of power, right? Now, when you have that information, and you get the information, and you don't use it, that is very powerful. Because what happens is, for instance, in the case of the police, we very quickly found out who were the policemen who were doing the kidnappings, who were the policemen who were doing the drug trafficking, who were the policemen who were doing the executions. We had the names, but we didn't use that information, right? We didn't use it to give it to the government. What we did is because of course giving it to the government with a totally corrupt policing system, what would happen is that we would be basically erased from the map, right? So what we did was we started putting together these courses for human rights for policemen, and we invited the policemen who were in human rights, who had human rights issues. We never told them that we knew what they were doing, right? So what happened when you get these guys who should actually go to prison, you give them a course, and you're telling them, I know about you. Actually, you start building trust. Same thing with the criminals. So once you start building trust, people start trusting. And then that can go all the way to 100%. They start trusting everything. And you start suddenly getting a windfall of information about, I mean, I don't know if I should say this, but anyway, there's this big there was this cartel that a few years ago people started hearing about it in Venezuela. And we found out about it maybe 7 or 8 years before, let's say, the police knew about it. Huh? And so that's one thing. Trust breeds trust, violence breeds violence. And the trust comes from information and how you use the information. You can't abuse the information. You have to know how to use it. Why doesn't the government use, and I'm mentioning one very effective, but there are many other things, right? Because once you get that trust, the other thing is when you go through the door of the criminals, and you have the trust of the criminals, you have access to the whole community. And people start really trusting and start giving you even more information. So why can't the government do this, or why don't they do it? One of the things that we do is not contemplated in the law. We are sort of, how do you call that, alternative? We have alternative methods that aren't contemplated in the law. So they feel they're doing something that's illegal. What we try to do is something that's ethical. So I don't know if I answered that question precisely, but anyway. The other thing is scalability. Yeah, the big challenge for us was how can you turn this into something scalable? How can you multiply this? And the first conclusion of a lot of people was that this wasn't going to be scalable because of the individuals that were implied. In my case, and in the case of Jimmy Perez, who was the head of security. But actually, so we've challenged that, and the first thing we did 2 different analyses of the project. Then we put together, we have sort of constructed a model. Actually, we've improved Alcatraz 1.0. Now it's Alcatraz 2.0 with Accenture and with all the manuals. And actually, we've recruited a team that had nothing to do with the foundation of Alcatraz to see if it works. And actually, Alcatraz 2.0 is a lot more effective than Alcatraz 1.0, and I'm not in it. So that's one of the things. I do think it's scalable. Right now, we're fine-tuning Alcatraz 2.0. We're going to be doing impact evaluation soon, and hopefully we'll be exporting to other regions of the country, maybe of the region. And the third question has to do with the invasion and the Alcatraz Project were reactions. There were reactions to attacks. Actually, one of the things I didn't mention with Camino Real, with the invasion, was that once we did that, once we got those learnings, we said, okay, how do we go about this in a more, instead of reacting to it, how do we take the first move? And we started building the whole thing about social development into the strategy of the company. Actually, one of the things that has happened is that it has changed our positioning as a brand. And basically, we've gone into planning the future of the county, and we've got this model now that's called PPP. It's not public-private partnership, but it's pueblo público privado, ¿no? Where you use the communities, public sector and private sector, and it's basically inviting even the Chavista government and private sector. For instance, one of the private companies is Microsoft, who has tons of problems with the government, but in this county we're trying to turn it into a neutral county where these three, let's say, parts can actually work together as a team on a vision. And one of the things, this county is very Chavista. It's the second most Chavista county of the second most Chavista state. So it's very Chavista. But the thing is, once you get down to the personal relationships, then you can start building the future. So we are past reacting and now being more proactive. So thank you for the question also.
And we have time. Yeah, se acabó? All right. Well, I want to ask everybody to give a hand to all our panelists and to our translator.